Awesome. Well, thank you, Charlene. I appreciate that. Um, we'll get started. My name is Jeff Laliberty, and I serve on the programs committee as part of the chamber, and also the executive director of the Burroughs Family Branch, YMCA in Westboro. On behalf of the chamber, would like to welcome you all to this month's Carter 9 Regional Chamber of Commerce Success Express workshop on the importance of mental health for your employees. Before I introduce our speakers today from Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, I'd like to take a moment to reiterate the mission of the Carter 9 495 Regional Chamber of Commerce, which is to be a dynamic regional business organization striving to promote prosperity and the quality of life of our members and communities. Our Success Express workshops are for the chamber members to help with their professional and business development. Each workshop is designed to be interactive and taught by experts in their respective fields. For our webinar, we do ask that you turn your video on. It not only helps the presenter gauge their presentation, but it's also a networking event as well on here. So please put your contact information in the chat box so others can reach out and know who else is on the call today. Would like to introduce and thank Berkshire Bank, who is our sponsor for our Success Express webinars. Berkshire Bank has been a sponsor for many years, and their sponsorship allows us to present these free with no charge to our members. Sonia from Berkshire Bank is on the Zoom today with us, so I'd like to give her an opportunity to say a few words if she chooses to. Sonia? Oh, you're muted, Sonia.
Yeah, that will work better. Thank you, Jeff. Maybe sign language. So good morning, everyone. My name is Sonia Descormier. I am a relationship manager here at Berkshire Bank in the Worcester community. We are your sponsor for today's webinar. I would like to thank the Chamber of Commerce and the committee to giving us the opportunity to present these educational and informative webinar. Just a bit more about Berkshire Bank. We are a small local bank. We've been in business for 176 years. Our mission is to help business to thrive and grow and prosper. And we're very proud to be partnering with the Chamber today, the 945 corridor for this webinar. So enjoy the presentation today, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you much, Sonia, and thanks to Berkshire again for putting this on for us. I know a lot of people do benefit from these. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our four speakers from Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services. Got a powerful crew here today. Christine Mowry is a nonprofit executive who has been leading Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services since 2015, during which time the agency has experienced exponential growth in both its clinical and geographical capacities. Prior to this role, she led the agency's Mental Health Awareness Training Initiative as a project director for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration Project Aware-C Youth Mental Health First Aid Program. Through this program, they have trained nearly 4,000 adults across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Christine is a certified mental health instructor in the youth, adult, older adult, higher education, public safety, and teen populations. Allison Eccleston is the Director of School-Based Services at Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, which provides wraparound support, school-based counseling, clinical consultation in a variety of school districts, in addition to her private practice working with children, adolescents, and families. Allison received her master's in social work from Columbia and is a licensed independent clinical social worker specializing in trauma. She has expertise with child sexual abuse and the commercial sexual exploitation of children. Allison has almost 10 years of clinical experience and has worked in community-based mental health settings for over 3 years. With wraparound services and work with the Children's Behavioral Health Initiative, Allison has been trained in several evidence-based treatments such as trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and dialect behavioral therapy. Jennifer Rifkin, who is also on the call with us today, is a social worker who has been working with children, adolescents, and families since 2001. She is currently the clinical director at Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, where she oversees the outpatient clinic and other support services. She is also a mental health first aid instructor and teaches classes statewide. Prior to her work at Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, Jennifer was the director of youth and young adult services for a decade at the Institute of Health and Recovery. While there, she developed an expertise in treating youth substance use disorders, consulted with the Mass Department of Public Health on youth substance um, use treatment program design, and provided trainings on youth substance abuse across the state. Jennifer has also a strong background in working with youth involved in the juvenile justice system and child welfare systems. And last but certainly not least is Jamie Glenn, project manager, whom is the project director of mental health awareness training at Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, with over 15 years experience advocating and working in the mental health field and managing projects. She is a Worcester native and graduate of Dynami's John S. Law Institute with a human service degree from Quinsig and a bachelor's in advocacy and social justice from UMass Amherst. She is very involved in the community and is a member of the NAACP and a volunteer of the National Alliance of Mental Health or Mental Illness. Jamie is a recipient of the Worcester Arts Council project grant and will be infusing art-centered events encouraging self-care back into the community. So as you can see, versed team that will be presenting today's webinar. In the setup today, the team will present for about the next 45 minutes or so. They'll be using the chat feature if you should have any questions. If you have a question that needs an immediate answer, feel free to use a reaction feature and raise your hand. At this time, we'd like to turn it over to Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Good morning. I'm Christine Moore. It's nice to see you all here. Thank you to the Corridor for hosting us, and thank you to Berkshire Bank for sponsoring. We always welcome an opportunity to talk about mental health because, as we all know, it is impacting literally everyone. So just so we have a common understanding, when we talk about mental health, we're really describing our state of social, psychological, and emotional well-being, and it is an integral part of our overall wellness. There's really a vast body of research linking mental and physical health, which really work together, influencing how we think, feel, and act. There is a lot of research around chronic illnesses such as cancer, heart disease, diabetes, making a person more likely to experience a mental health condition. And conversely, there are mental health conditions that, like depression, that play a really increasing role in our physical health as well. So as we know, mental health touches every aspect of our lives, especially workplace performance. Key performance indicators such as productivity, creativity, social engagement, all can really take a hit if an employee's mental health is suffering. So we certainly want to prioritize that mental health. I want to give you just a little bit of data before we begin. 50% of all mental health issues begin before the age of 14. So this happens pretty young. 75% by the age of 21. And during a recent survey of business leaders post-COVID, mental health issues they report have really negative impact on operations in a number of ways. A decrease in revenue of 40%, a decrease in profitability of 39%, diminished output, 26% decrease, and reduced competitiveness by 20%. So, business leaders report that stress negatively impacts their life outside of work, including reduced sleep, worsened work-life balance, and less time with your families. So given that mental health can have such an impact on finances, productivity, turnover, supervisors considered mental health when making business decisions. So I am going to open this up to a conversation with Allison and Jen around some of the trends that we're seeing, some of the signs and symptoms that we might see, and then Jamie will speak a little bit about how we can better support one another in the workplace.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine. I appreciate it. Thank you again for joining us this morning. We feel like this is a really critical topic. So as Christine mentioned, this is obviously a really common issue that folks are facing everywhere. The data that we had prior to COVID is that, in any one year, 1 in 5 young people are going to have a mental health issue or mental health concern of some kind. That's pre-COVID data. I don't have current COVID data, post-COVID data, but I'm quite positive it's significantly higher. One of the things that we are seeing constantly in our clinic here, and while we certainly primarily serve youth, we absolutely serve adults as well. We're seeing a dramatic increase in the number of people that are coming in for anxiety disorders and depression. I think, this isn't rocket science here. I think a lot of folks would probably understand that this is in many ways a result of the isolation that we all felt from COVID. I think work from home has been wonderful for families in many, many ways. But I think in other aspects, work from home has allowed people to isolate further and further. If you guys can think back prior to COVID, going into the office all the time, the relationships that you have with your coworkers are really unique, special relationships. You're with these people 40 hours a week. You're with them in many cases more than you are your own family. You're certainly with them more than you are your friends. So I feel like the lack of consistent relationship building opportunities with coworkers has had a dramatic impact on workplace sort of function. Because obviously, you come to work and you're there to work, but the social support a lot of folks had pre-COVID when they were going into the office every day is simply not there. That's fewer people to talk to on a daily basis, or fewer people to sort of check up on you if you're not doing so well. It's fewer people to notice what's going on sort of as you walk in the door and sort of see those changes. One of the things, and Jamie will talk a little bit more about this when we talk about mental health first aid, but in those classes, we teach people how to recognize signs and symptoms that someone may be heading towards the development of a mental health challenge. And if you're not seeing people or interacting with them on a very regular basis, you might be much less likely to notice those signs and symptoms in other people. So again, while I'm not necessarily an advocate of like removing work from home, I think it has many benefits and many areas of people's lives, especially folks who are parents. It's not all good, and particularly around mental health, I think it's not all good. Allison, do you want to talk a little bit about what you see sort of on a daily basis and the folks that you serve? Or
Speaking of parents, right? So I primarily work with children in school systems, and I think one of the ways that we're really seeing how mental health is impacting families and parents, and specifically the workplace, is really, to go back to what Jen was saying, the trickle down from the pandemic and the shutdown, right? There was a point in time where we had parents that had to learn how to work entirely remotely, if not just lose their jobs, in addition to also being full-time educators, which can be really, really challenging, to say the least. And then I think, although we have been moving towards back to a new normal, right? Like schools are open, kids are there. I think what a lot of parents are finding is even their kids are still really struggling with just transitioning back. So even though you might be back in your office 40 hours a week in the swing of things, if you're getting a call every single day from school because your child is having profound mental health issues, it's going to be really difficult to get your job done. In addition to that, I think now more than ever, people are having more and more conversations about accessing support and treatment, right? Whether it's outpatient treatment, seeing somebody once a week to talk to them, or something more intensive, hospitalizations. And I think the biggest thing that we are finding across the state, really across the country, is that there just aren't enough therapists. So, at any point in time, whether it's an adult or a child, you could go look for someone, and whether or not it's insurance or private pay, you might not be able to find anyone for 9 months, right? Which means that you are solely then responsible for trying to do the best you can until you can get access to that formal supports. And that makes things very, very challenging, to say the least. So I think those are the things that we're seeing a lot of. And I think that's part of what our programming tries to do. We try to connect people with the best supports we can. We also try to support them the best we can, but that's sort of the reality of the world right now. And I think it's having a huge impact on people's ability just to get work done, to focus, to be present during your job, all of those things.
Yeah, so in terms of signs and symptoms.
Just going to say that, Jen, thank you.
In terms of signs and symptoms, when we talk about mental health and emerging mental health issues, there are a couple of key indicators that we can look for. So certainly we're going to talk about, you know, some observable change here. So someone might literally look more depressed. I think everyone can sort of know what that looks like. It doesn't necessarily look like someone, you know, crying in a corner saying I'm miserable, like I can't believe I have to live this life. That may happen, and it may happen behind closed doors, but in terms of an everyday sort of walking around, you just see that person who doesn't look right. They're smiling less. They're talking to their colleagues less, or they're talking to their friends less. They're isolating more. You're noticing that they are simply not engaged with the world in the same way that they used to be. And again, it's not your job. None of you guys, I assume, are trained therapists. It's not your job to be like, I think this person is depressed. Perhaps they need a referral. But it is potentially your job as a caring community member, a caring person in the world, to say like, you know, I've just noticed a change in your behavior. I'm noticing that you're having a little bit, you know, you're not joining us at lunch anymore in the lunchroom. You're not chatting when you go to make yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. You're not stopping to talk for 5 minutes to, you know, whoever the person who has the office next to the coffee maker is. You're just not engaging in the same way. And that is, again, I think, maybe not your job, but it is potentially a responsibility that we all have, particularly if you're in a supervisory role, to be able to support your staff in the best way that you can. It's all about noticing the changes. So depression, again, someone might look depressed. For anxiety, it might look a little bit different. It might be someone who all of a sudden, they're having a really hard time staying in one place. Sitting down for extended periods of time feels uncomfortable. I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced anxiety in their lifetime. Whether or not it's diagnosable, we've all experienced that feeling of anxiety before. It's physically uncomfortable. You have butterflies in your stomach. Sometimes you feel like sweaty. Your heart might beat a little bit faster. It doesn't feel good. So if you have a diagnosable anxiety disorder, if you're developing one, it can be very physically uncomfortable. So you might see people a little bit more like physically agitated or physically active. And again, that's a change you as a caring individual who cares about your staff, who cares about people in the community in general. It is in your capacity to note that and have that conversation with the individual and say, again, this is something that I've noticed. It's a change. So those are a couple of really big key factors. Some other things you may or may not notice, depending on sort of how well you know an individual, how much they're disclosing. Sleep can be dramatically impacted by mental health. Depression and anxiety can make it very, very difficult to fall asleep, to stay asleep. You know, it does have a very significant impact on your body and your brain's ability to sort of rest and recovery. So if you're noticing that someone's coming in tired day after day after day, that might also be another indicator that, you know, something isn't quite right with this individual. We need to sort of get a hold of them and sort of check in with them. Hey, is everything okay? It just seems like you're a little bit more tired than usual. Is there anything I can do for you? Are you feeling more stressed than usual? What's going on? And those can be awkward and hard conversations. But again, Jamie's going to talk a little bit more about mental health first aid, which is a program that will literally teach you how to have those conversations. So I think learning, again, how to notice a change. One of the things when I do mental health first aid, I talk about, if you guys are Spider-Man fans or have kids that are into Spider-Man, they talk about Spider-Man having something called Spidey sense, where Spider-Man notices like something just isn't quite right. So when I do trainings on mental health first aid or, you know, mental health in general, I do talk to people about use your Spidey sense, because there's going to be something in your brain that's going to go off. There's going to be something in your gut that's going to go off, that's going to tell you something isn't right. Pay attention to your Spidey sense. It could quite literally save someone's life And even if we're not talking about a life-saving situation, it can help improve their job performance to know that someone in their office cares. It can help them feel like I actually want to come to work, because work is a place where someone is noticing me. Work is a place where I'm honored as a person, and it's not just my output, but me as a human being. And when folks are in the throes of a depressive episode or feeling very significantly anxious, I think they can lose sight. It's very easy to lose sight of how you are perceived as an individual when you start to think of yourself as, maybe in the workplace, oh, I'm just an employee. That doesn't matter. All that matters is what I put out. And I would imagine most of you, well, I'm sure if you're on this webinar, you're someone who particularly feels that that's not the case, and that the whole person, the whole employee is really important to you.
So thank you, Jen. So as Jen said, half of all adults will experience a mental health issue. So 50% in any given year of adults will have a diagnosable mental health issue. That means half of us here sitting on this webinar today, half of us. If it's not you, it's going to be somebody that you know closely. So, there are really many ways a work environment can contribute toward poor mental health at work. Excessive stress and frustration due to maybe some toxic relationships or inexperienced leadership, unclear communication really can build up over time. And if you layer this with the lack of clear roles and expectations, long or maybe inflexible work schedules or unrealistic demands, and lack of support for employees, it's really no surprise that an employee could feel a little unsatisfied or depressed and exhausted. And given the climate of the world that we're living in right now, it's pretty common. So a couple of other factors that could contribute: too many unpleasant or repetitive tasks in your job, or no sense of teamwork, being subjected to discrimination in the workplace, watching favoritism play out with some of your coworkers, or harassment or bullying. So I think when we look at behavior of our coworkers, and this does not only apply to your coworkers, this is everybody in your life, a young person, an old person, a friend, a family member. This applies everywhere. When we look at behavior, I want you to think about it sort of outside the box. Think about it like an iceberg, right? So what you see above the waterline, that's the behavior stuff you're seeing. So if somebody at work has a short fuse, or is blowing up in meetings, or being really difficult to work with, we really want to think about what's underneath that waterline, right? There's always a motivator for every single behavior. So it's time then to maybe ask some questions there. Jen talked about a couple of the signs and symptoms, but there are also a couple of benchmarks. Is the behavior present for more than 2 weeks? Is it impacting, if you know the person outside of the workplace, is it impacting them in all areas of their life? Is it impacting their work, their family, their friends, their ability to engage in things they enjoy, social activities? So we really kind of try to look at where the impact is and how long that is lasting. And then it's really time to kind of step in and ask some questions. And I know we've brought up, I think several of us have brought up mental health first aid. It's a huge piece of what we do. It's not the only thing that we do, but it is a big initiative for us. And that's really designed to teach people that are not mental health professionals how to recognize the signs and symptoms, and how to help a coworker or a friend or a family member. We are federally funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration to provide this training. So if anybody wants this training for their business, it's an 8-hour training. It's free. It's 100% free to all of you, to anybody. It's effective and impactful and pertinent to everybody on the face of this earth right now in this world. So Jamie joined us pretty recently when we just were federally funded for the second time for this program. We've actually trained about 6,000 adults in the state of Massachusetts. And I think one of the things Jen even can talk about is, we do a lot of work with youth. And so we do a lot of work with teachers and in schools, and training teachers, because we really, as Allison had said, do not have enough behavioral health professionals. We just don't. There are fewer people going into the field. The burnout rate is high, the turnover is high, the pay is notoriously low. So it's really a difficult industry to be in. So we really work hard to sort of create a wide safety net of lay people who know I recognize that as a potential sign of a budding mental health or substance use challenge, and I can help. I can step in. I have the tools and the knowledge, and I know what to do. in our work with schools, we have this past year discovered that there are a lot of teachers that are really struggling. You know, I think when we came back from COVID, we were in such a rush to get back to normal and to bring kids back to schools that we never took a moment to sort of meet them where they're at. We lost a couple of years of development, and we never even took one moment to meet them where they're at. We just expected everybody jump back in, normal is best, let's move forward. And so we're seeing fallout, as Allison talked about, in parents who are then going to their workplaces, in teachers. And Jen, you can talk a little bit about how we are trying to address that. But the initiative for mental health first aid, and I'll let Jamie talk more about that program, is a really important one. And I encourage every single person participating in this webinar today to take Jeff, you can talk about it. We did it at the YMCA with you several years ago. I encourage you all to take advantage of this opportunity. It is 100% free. And for 8 hours of you and your employees' time, you might reap some really huge benefits across your productivity, across your culture, in every way. So I'm going to let Jamie talk a little bit about what that program means.
Thank you, and thank you all for hosting us and having us here. Honestly, Jen, Allison, and Christine spoke a lot about the program, but similar to CPR, what it is you're trained so that you can be prepared should a situation occur. So mental health first aid kind of prepares you, and the biggest piece is the destigmatization of mental health. And we've recently had a training at HR with HR professionals out in Newton. And the biggest thing is they just did not feel comfortable speaking about it, noticing the signs, having the conversations, and being present for their employees. EAP is not working in their particular situation. I can't speak on yours, but they wanted a solution to kind of bring that community back to their workplace because they're having high turnover, everything that everyone has been speaking about, but just feeling like there's no resources. So mental health first aid, one piece of it that is important is signs and symptoms, but it's also connecting to resources. We are not therapists. We do not diagnose, but what we can do is connect you to the support systems that you need. And as Christine said, we have 2 formats for it. We have a blended form and we have a full day, which would be the 8 hours. And we would come in and we would train you. It's interactive. So there are group activities, there's team building. It's a remarkable way to engage your staff and let them know that you care enough to bring this type of program into your office. And we are funded by, as she said, we are funded by SAMHSA. So we have for the next 4 years, we're able to come in and we certify each of your employees. It can start from the head up and then trickle down.
Thank you, Jamie. So, and I think what's important, and I want to give you just a little tiny highlight of some of the skills that we teach in that class to take with you today. And then maybe Jeff, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of feedback of how it impacted your staff. I think I did that training with you many years ago. It was a long time ago. So maybe it's time for a refresh, but we are not born with these great communication abilities. It takes practice. It's a skill that we have to learn, particularly when we're listening to somebody else. We tend to kind of listen to people, and in our minds, we're formulating our response and we're getting ready to dig our heels in on our position on things. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time in that class teaching is the skill of non-judgmental listening, right? So somebody might be experiencing something, and for you, that's a different issue, or you see it from a completely different lens or perspective. But what's really important is that we are able to be present without judgment for whatever this person is experiencing, and that we are able to validate, even if we don't agree with what they're experiencing or saying. So, framing things in a way that takes the judgment out, like I statements. Mm-hmm. Like, so instead of me saying, "Hey, Mr. Grossman, you didn't show up to that meeting, or you lost your cool in that meeting. Hey, I noticed, Mr. Grossman, that, you were a little on edge or something was uncomfortable for you. Is there something you want to talk about? I'm here for you. So really trying to put that focus on yourself instead of making it sound like an accusatory statement, because then we immediately feel defensive, right? You didn't do this on time, or you didn't get this done. I immediately feel defensive. So we want to make sure that we create a really safe space. Really, this whole class is just about creating a safe space. That's the bottom line. It's about being human. It's about allowing vulnerability. It's about
Being comfortable.
about validation. And then, hey, you know what? You don't have to have the answer. You don't have to say, well, I know what to do with this, but you do have the ability to say, you know what? I don't know what the next step is, but I'll be with you and I'll hold your hand through it, and I will help you access the right professional to help you with whatever your problem is that you're experiencing. So this is really about human relationship, right? Everything is about human relationships, everything in every industry across the board. So, I think there's such a huge ripple effect. If it's not your staff member or a coworker that it's experiencing something, it could be somebody that's in their family. And like Allison said, if you've got a child that's experiencing a mental health issue, or you're taking care of a aging parent, or there's dementia and Alzheimer's, there's so many stressors, the cost of living, the political climate in this country, the mass shootings every time you turn around, so much going on that this is really the time for us to be human and be vulnerable with one another and support one another. I think that's really the bottom line and the most important thing that we can do for our friends, our families, and our coworkers. Jeff, can you take a quick second and just talk about your experience with mental health first aid?
Yeah. So we had you guys in, I think probably pre-COVID, Christine. So definitely time for a refresher for us as well. But I will say that been with the Y for 20 years, and Betsy, I see, is on the call now, and she's in charge of our HR and puts on a host of trainings for us a couple times a year. We go to regional trainings. And the mental health first aid, out of my 20 years, was probably the most impactful training that I've taken. It really, as Christine said, really focus on the self and creating that safe space, and really articulating how to create that space, instead of saying, where were you, what happened, could be, hey, we missed you, what's going on, I see you didn't make it to this meeting. So there was different ways of framing things, and really just reinforcing everything the Y is about. We're people first over here, and it really just reinforces trying to meet people where they're at, look at people, and try to understand the lens that they're looking at the world through. Right, we all have different experiences, as Christine was saying, and different things going on at home, and just being attuned to when somebody's a little off at work, try to have that conversation with them in a polite and respectful and safe way. So it gives a lot of different tools, a lot of different tips and tricks to kind of navigate those conversations, which we found really helpful, especially in our summer camp program. After we first did it, we kind of brought some of those learnings right to our camp staff too, and they were able to identify and navigate in ways that we hadn't before. So it's always something that we talk about here, Christine, and we've got a few new folks in the queue, so we'll get you guys back soon for sure. But if your business has the opportunity to do it, I would say well worth your while for sure.
One of the things I also want to jump in and add about the mental health first aid program, and sort of, it does such a nice job of helping to demystify mental health challenges and to sort of remove stigma. And I think, again, even if you don't, as a business leader, feel like you are confident in, and you shouldn't, making a diagnosis and writing up a treatment plan, like, we don't do that. That's not what you need to do. That's for the mental health professionals to do. But if you are comfortable and confident in your ability to identify a potential issue and have that initial conversation with your employee, that can be such a powerful experience. I think about this all the time in sort of relation to medical issues. If someone gets a cancer diagnosis, or if someone has a bad fall and breaks their leg, we all sort of as a society understand what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to say like, hey, can I make you a meal? Hey, can I drive you to your doctor's appointment? Do you need childcare? What can I do to help you make this time easier? If someone gets diagnosed with depression, major depressive episode, which really has a dramatic impact on your ability to function, having a depressive episode. In fact, it's actually the leading cause of short-term disability in the United States is depression. It's not other medical stuff, it's depression. No one's coming over with lasagna. No one's saying, hey, do you need a ride? No one's saying, hey, can I help you with childcare? Can I help you? Can I call the window guy for you because it looks like your, windows need replacing, whatever it might be. No one's offering that type of help. And that's the type of help that you guys are, again, as sort of caring community members, perfectly capable of doing. I'm sure you've all done it many times before for friends and family and coworkers, because it's stuff you know how to do. But no one does that for mental health, and becoming more and more comfortable with mental health allows you to provide that same level of support that you would for medical issues. And again, that's why I mentioned before, you can really save a life in doing that. It's tremendously impactful. You don't have to be a therapist to be able to help someone that is struggling with a mental health issue. Christine, you're muted.
Thank you. Allison, would you mind talking a little bit about trauma and how that could impact somebody?
Sure. So, I think the simplest way to understand trauma is that something happened that had a really big impact on you, right? I think sometimes people are really uncomfortable using the word trauma. I think people typically have a very specific image of something particularly violent or veterans. But the reality is the research shows that the exact event or whatever is that happened isn't as relevant as how it has impacted you and what it means to you. And I think when people experience trauma, that's a lot of the times where you're going to see somebody having a pretty big change, like a lot of the changes that Jen and Christine and Jamie were talking about. So you might notice that, all of a sudden you have a coworker that's drinking 6 cups of coffees a day, and they didn't do that before. And if you ask them about it, you'll learn that they just haven't been sleeping since the car accident that they were in. You could notice that, somebody's not turning in their timesheets as timely as they did before. And it could be because they're so disorganized because they can't stop thinking about the shutdown and how hard it was for them. So it's so many little things like that. And a lot of it can stem from, again, a traumatic event happening to someone, and all of a sudden an appearance or an increase in symptoms of depression and anxiety. For sure. And I think that's one of the biggest things we seen when COVID happened. COVID had as we all know, COVID had a profound impact on people, whether it be the shutdown, whether it be grieving someone you lost or several people that you lost, and still trying to just, figure out what life looks like since then has been really, really challenging for a lot of people, and also a lot of people's loved ones, which is also going to have an impact on them for sure.
Also, just want to throw out there that trauma is the single biggest risk factor in developing a mental health challenge. And, if you think about COVID as a trauma, which, I think there's in the research a little bit of debate as to whether or not it's quote unquote classified as a trauma or not. But regardless, many people have experienced COVID as a trauma. It's no wonder that you see this vast increase in folks that are struggling with mental health issues right now. We have all really just come out of something that was quite traumatic and jarring for us as a world.
And I think, we continue to be exposed to things that are quite traumatic and jarring on a daily basis, every single day. The number of shootings, what's happening politically, what's happening with the war in Ukraine. There's just so much going on. So I think even secondary trauma, and Jen, maybe you can talk a little bit about what the work that you've done this year with some secondary trauma issues, particularly in the school-based setting with teachers. Even if you weren't directly impacted, hearing about other people's trauma or trying to support other people's trauma can also be somewhat traumatizing.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Christine mentioned, and as Allison just has been talking about throughout the morning, schools have been a place where, kids have come back not ready to go, just developmentally a little bit further behind than they were, and teachers doing the absolute best they can to try and hang in there with those students. But after a while, it becomes really, really challenging for those teachers to continue to support the students who are potentially having meltdowns on a daily basis because they're struggling with anxiety, they're struggling with depression. That takes a toll on teachers. So one of the things that we had done in response to one of the school districts that Allison provides, school-based services for, they actually reached out to us and said, is there anything you can do for the teachers? We want to support our staff too. So I came up with basically a 4-week self-care curriculum where we learned about sort of different forms of self-care, how to prevent burnout, how to recognize burnout, how to recognize stress. We talk a little more extensively about how trauma impacts the brain and then how that impacts your sort of everyday functioning, just so people had a better understanding of why they were maybe feeling the way they were, as well as developing skills and sort of concrete ideas to move forward to help mitigate some of those stress responses that folks are receiving. So that's something that we would also be able to offer, to businesses if folks are noticing that their staff are just feeling overwhelmed, they're just not engaging in the same way. If this is a way to sort of recognize, hey, something isn't right. I want to be able to take care of my staff. This is something we can do for you guys. We can certainly offer our sort of 4-week self-care group that's really designed for employees. Because again, as we talked about several times, a lot of people, maybe their focus is on their kids, their focus is on other people's mental health, their focus is everywhere but themselves. This is a chance for people to tune into their own selves. It's not therapy, it's not group therapy, it's not meant to be. It's just a chance for you to connect with yourself and focus on your own self-care. And we simply don't do that enough. And again, the purpose of the group is to encourage people to do that, not only when they're in the group, but once they're outside of the group. And there's homework every week where the homework is all about doing some self-care and making self-care a regular practice and a regular part of your life. And when folks are able to do that and engage in self-care, they're more productive employees. They're able to focus more. They're dealing with everyday stress in a healthy way. And it's, Christine mentioned before, because of the lack of therapists, we might not be able to serve every sort of individual that walks through our door because we just don't have enough staff. But in offering sort of support type groups, we can give folks the tools they need to sort of manage their stress on their own, so things don't escalate and become mental health problems.
So I wanted to just touch very briefly and at a very high level on substance use disorders as well, because we know that they're also on the rise. Suicide right now is the second leading cause of death for 10 to 24-year-olds, second leading cause of death. Substance use, the average age of onset, anybody have a guess? Average age of onset of substance use disorder? Gave you the mental health stats. What do you think? In the chat box, anyone? No, it's 15 years old. It's really young. It's really young. So we know that, about 90% of those with a substance use disorder have a co-occurring mental health issue. So I want to talk a little bit about some of that. We talked about trauma being the single biggest risk factor for a mental health issue. But I think it would be important to talk a little bit about some of the other risk factors, in particular around substance use disorder, because I think it's really important that we have these conversations with the people that we work with our family members. It's so widely acceptable that, we go out for happy hour and we go out for drinks, and it's super easy. This is a chicken or the egg situation, which comes first, right? Do we start using substances and then develop mental health disorders? Do we use substances to cope with mental health disorders? It's probably a little bit of both. But a genetic predisposition is a really, really, really big risk factor. So if you have someone in your family, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, sister, brother that has a substance use disorder, your risk of developing a substance use disorder is dramatically increased. When we introduce a substance before your brain is fully developed, and what age is that? Around 25, right? We don't develop our full frontal cortex until we're about 25 years old. So when we introduce a substance before that age, you're much more dramatically likely to develop a substance use disorder. Mental health, co-occurring mental health conditions, traumas. Sometimes we're prescribed at a young age an inappropriate amount of opioids for, let's say, wisdom teeth. Physicians have been known to really overprescribe. I think Mr. Grossman can attest to the amount of opioids he just got for surgery that was wildly inappropriate. So there are all kinds of different things that happen that can lead to those things. But I think it's really important too that we talk about some of the protective factors. So what can we do to protect ourselves from that? Number one, openly talk about this stuff. Remove the stigma. It's one of the biggest missions of our agency is to eradicate the stigma around mental health and substance use disorders, because every one of us sitting here is impacted somewhere in our lives. I guarantee it. And if somebody's telling you they're not impacted, they're full of baloney. It is impacting everybody. So some of the things we can do, do not underestimate the impact of diet and exercise on your mental health. So there's some research out there right now that puts diet and exercise right up there with therapy and medication as effective ways to treat mental illness. So we definitely want to be wary of that. There's a really great book called Minding Your Gut that's around the diet and the impact on your mental health. Doing things that are self-care for you, and that's different for everybody. So maybe, meditation has proven benefits to reduce anxiety symptoms. So maybe that's something you can implement in your workplace, like mindful moments or a weekly meditation group or something like that. The biggest protective factor for everybody, young people and adults alike, is one single close relationship with somebody who is non-judgmental, who is a consistent support, and who you feel really comfortably being vulnerable with, particularly for young people, but it works for everyone. So, social connectedness is a big protective factor. Being engaged is something that makes you feel valuable. So maybe volunteering, maybe as a company or as a business, you can give back to the community and pick a local charity or somewhere to volunteer. Social connectedness, sense of belonging, those are all things that are really big protective factors. So there's lots of different things that we can do to try to alleviate some of the concerns, but it's, I don't think that we see a light at the end of the tunnel with the impact. We already were in a mental health crisis prior to COVID. COVID just really exacerbated things. So we see, an increase in the acuity of symptoms for those that were already struggling, and certainly a new onset for people who weren't struggling. So, what we would ask of you as managers, supervisors, HR professionals, business owners, leaders in any way, coworkers, is to check in with the people around you. Just ask, just check in. How are you doing? Is everything going okay? Is there anything I can support you with? Do you want to talk about anything? I think that's really the most important message of the day. And if you are interested in bringing any deeper training, please reach out to us. We are happy to be there. I think we wanted to spend some time for questions. So we wanted to open it up. If you have any questions for any of us, now would be a good time.
Christine?
Yes, Mr. Grossman.
Question of appropriateness. When you have someone, a staff member, who's starting to behave inappropriately, at what point are you invading privacy by delving? Something that I experienced recently. To me, it's a fine line between interfering with someone's private life and trying to help them be more aware of how they may be disrupting in the business.
So, okay, so this is a great question. Thank you for asking. And it's a question that we talk about a lot when we're talking about how to approach, right? So the first thing that we always want to do before we approach anyone, and this is a part of the action plan we teach in mental health first aid, you always want to assess the situation for risk, right? Risk of harm to yourself, risk of harm to the person. If somebody's super agitated and you want to reach out, we just want to make sure that everybody's in a safe place, first of all. So that's a question that, again, you start with an I statement. I've noticed that I've noticed that that was a little tough for you, that meeting, or you had a big reaction to something. Is there something you want to talk about? Use your gut instinct. If that person is completely shut down, we don't want you drilling and pushing until there's a big escalation and a crisis. But you could just very gently say, hey, listen, I noticed that it was tough for you, or you're not, or I noticed that you didn't react how you normally would react. Is there something going on? If they want to open up to you, wonderful. If they don't, you can always say, hey, you know what? I'm here for you. I just want you to know, is it okay if I check back with you in a couple of days? Obviously, as a business leader, if somebody is not willing to open up or tell you what's going on and there is repeated performance issues, you would end up probably putting a performance plan in place. And that's just what happens. But we hope that before you get to that step, you would try to at least have the conversation 1, 2, maybe 3 times. And if the person's really just not open to stepping up, obviously you've got to run your business. And then there would be repercussions. But we hope that just as a fellow human being, you would take the opportunity to first try to uncover any other distressors that you might not be aware of.
And I want to just add to
Go
that,
ahead.
just to add to that a little bit, sometimes, especially if you're in leadership, you may recognize that that person that you want to have the conversation with has a person within the workplace. And if you feel more comfortable having that conversation with the person that is not you directly, but the person that is their personal person, saying, hey, I've noticed this about so-and-so. If you feel comfortable, do you want to have this conversation with them? Because I want to make sure that they feel comfortable enough to open up if there's something going on. Sometimes that works. I know we talk about it we had some ABAs, and sometimes students feel more comfortable with the ABA instead of the teacher in the class. So it's a way to try to meet them where they're at and have the conversation with people that will work with them.
I think that's a really good point, Jamie, because also sometimes if you're in a leadership role, it might be a little intimidating for a staff member to open up about what's going on in their personal life. So that's a great point. Thank you. If you know of somebody else that they're close with in the workplace, or even a peer that they may be more likely to open up to, that's a great way to start too. And sometimes, even if you're not in a leadership role, sometimes you're just not the right person. Sometimes you just don't have that relationship, and that's okay. And you just ask somebody who does have a relationship with that person if they would be willing to just ask a couple of questions in a really supportive and non-judgmental way.
Thank you.
Regarding the 8-hour training, is that 8 solid hours? Can it be split up into groups? Is there a shorter training available? I'm thinking about a newly formed ERG that we have at my organization. So being able to bring in, this conversation would be great, but 8 hours does seem a little overwhelming. So I'm curious about that.
So it is an 8-hour training. You can break it up into 2 4-hour sessions. And it is not us standing there with a bunch of slides the whole time, just rambling on and on and on. It's really interactive training. So there's lots of group work, and we do break it up, and it's a heavy topic. The second half is probably a little bit heavier than the first half. There are some videos involved. There's some scenarios that, fictional scenarios that we work on in groups. Yeah, you can break it up into 2 days, but it is a full 8 hours for that particular training. And that is actually, that training's been around for, gosh, it was developed in Australia in 2008. It came to the US and then was piloted. The pilot started in 2012 for a youth version for adults working with youth, and then launched in 2014. And then, gosh, there's an adult program. There's a adults helping youth. There's adults assisting older adults. There's public safety, fire EMS, higher education. There's a million different population modules. We recently, right prior to COVID, Lady Gaga's Born This Way Foundation piloted a teen peer program that we were a pilot site for, one of 35 in the country. We are an implementation site for that now. So we can do it really in any industry. The adult program is appropriate for any industry, but there are a lot of sort of subpopulation models that might fit better for you, depending on what your business is. And there is a blended version that you can do 2 hours of pre-work on your own, and then 6 hours, 6.5 hours of in-person instruction.
Great information. I appreciate that.
Sure. And it's free.
Question.
Go ahead, Dan.
So for companies that don't have a large employee population, which is the bulk of our membership at the chamber, might the chamber office, might the Chamber of Commerce office, and this is on you, Carlene, consider having a training session there and inviting heterogeneous group of people to come and have the training?
And we love to combine
Yeah, that's a
smaller
great
organizations.
idea.
Yeah, definitely. Even if you have a smaller group and there's other groups around you that you communicate with, you guys can all get together.
Yeah.
And as long as we try to keep it at about 25 to 30, just because we are using a federal grant. And then we can just teach you all in the same place. So we can definitely combine. And if the chamber wants to host us, we're more than welcome or more than happy to go there.
I think what I will do is on Thursday morning, I have my programs committee, and we will discuss it, and we will get right back to you and try to figure out the timing and put it right into our schedule. That sounds like a fantastic idea.
And Carlene, so you know, we do keep the classes at 25 to 30 per class because there's a lot of interaction. It's really hard to control a bigger class. So that's the recommended. But we also have 5 instructors. So we frequently go to big organizations and do simultaneous classes.
Okay.
So you don't have to keep offering it over and over. You can do it like on one day, and then 5 of us show up and we all go in a different room and our groups of 30 and off we go.
Sounds like a great idea.
Any final questions for the group here as we kind of wind down to the 10:30 mark? Awesome.
This was
Well,
fabulous.
yeah. So on behalf of the chamber, just really want to thank the team from Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services for putting together this little presentation today. I do know that I got some takeaways. I've you know, took the mental health first aid training before, and definitely worth the time to do so. But you know, rehashing the key indicators was something that kind of brought back some memories there. So taking that back to the staff team here at the YMCA will definitely be beneficial for us. In the next day or so, you'll receive a survey as well as the recording of this webinar. If you could take 5 minutes to complete the survey, that would be greatly appreciated. It just helps kind of identify what the emerging needs are in the future for our programs team. So if there's no other questions, want to thank Christine and her team from Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services today for their presentation, and Berkshire Bank, obviously, for their support and helping make this free of charge. So it seems like free is the key word for today. So we like Berkshire Bank, and we enjoy Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services for what they do for the community. So thank you all.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Allison. Bye, Jennifer.
Bye.
Bye-bye.